My name is Ben Polly, and I'm here to tell you about my experience of the ASX, Australian Stock Exchange, and what it has become. It's the real story of how it is a casino that is there to strip wealth from Australian mum and dad investors. So I started investing about 10 years ago from my father, who was a good investor. He had averaged 20% returns over 20 years. So by the time I finished my training with him, I felt like I had a moderate understanding of the stock market and I should do quite well. And since then, I've lost a lot of money. And it's not that I'm a bad investor, it's just something that happens to a lot of people these days. Uh, Honest people who want to invest their hard earned money, and they do the research and they find good companies to invest in. And there's just a hell of a lot of white collar crime which is occurring right now. Two big ones which I lost all my money on were Quintus and Arium. And it was clear to me after I researched how they both went into voluntary administration and lost all the money for shareholders. It was clear that they had been forced into this administration so that another company could seize control of the whole company because they were both very good, valuable companies. And Quintus, uh, BlackRock, a massive firm, multinational, one of the biggest investment companies in the world, if it isn't the biggest, got control of Quintus. And with Arium, Arium was sold to England's GFG Alliance for $700 million. And now, just a few years later, they're trying to sell that back onto the Australian Stock Exchange, part of that for at least $2 million. So something has gone wrong here where companies are able to be stripped of the shareholders, given to another company, and sold for inflated prices. So it's just a game of mates. So I've started researching that, and now it's just a conclusion I've made, which others have also made, is that the market is dominated by algorithms which manipulate prices very illegally, and also predatory short selling. Now, many people don't know what short selling is. Many people think that it is a bet against a company, and if you bet right, if the share price goes down, then you're rewarded, you make some money. But actually, the way short selling is done in Australia is not like that at all. Short selling companies put out reports, which is based on usually wrong facts, and it's all negative stuff, all fake news often. And they release these reports to other hedge funds who then they collude together. They borrow shares from institutions which own those shares. They borrow of super funds that own that shares, and they start selling those shares down in a pack, forcing the share price down. So it's forcing an artificial price. The usual supply and demand scenario disappears, and it's just a predatory act. Now, people know this, but the most illegal aspect of it is that they're using algorithmic programs to force the share price down. So they're setting artificial prices. They're using these programs which continually drop the price with small trades throughout the day. Now, your average investor, me or you, has to buy a minimum of $500 worth of shares. And then we get charged something like $20 brokerage if we do that. These guys, they've got special privileges. They're all plugged in to the building at the ASX with their special servers, and they can place one share trades, and they're using these small trades. They're drip feeding into the market to lower the prices, and if they want to, they can cap the prices. So if to stop the share price going up when there's some good news, they just cap it with these algorithms. And if there's bad news, they can drive it down. So it's very illegal. All the evidence has been reported to ASIC and the ASX, and it's ignored. And the question is why? And it's very clear that these institutions, these government departments, ASIC, and this public listed profit-making company, the Australian Stock Exchange, they are ignoring it because of their fellow buddies who are working for the investment banks. ASIC, the regulator, is not here to protect the mum and dad investor. It's here to protect those that are manipulating prices, and they're here to protect the investment banks who are stripping wealth from the Australians and the Australian economy. So I've wanted to do something about this, and very passionately I've been spending the last few years writing to people, other shareholders, and I wanted to tell you my process of who I've written to and their responses. Now, the first obviously was I reported all the misconduct I found, all the insider trading, all the manipulative trading to ASIC. Now, all you get from ASIC is a template response to say that thank you for the information. Now, we can't tell you anything about how we're going to use that information, but we really value your information. Now, that's all you get. You might get something different template, but pretty similar to that. Of course, I'm not satisfied with that, as are hundreds of other people not satisfied with that. If you report something that you've researched and you've found evidence that there's some illegal happening going on and you feel like you're being ignored, so what's the next step? And the next step that ASIC says is you can report your dissatisfaction to ASIC itself. There's a complaints body there that deals with complaints about ASIC. So I've put in complaints to that body as well, and got nowhere. Of course, got absolutely nowhere. So I've gone to my local member for Parliament, Ben Morton, and I've had him write to Josh Frydenberg, who was the finance minister, and Matthias Cormann, who was finance minister, and I've detailed my concerns about algorithmic trading, about predatory short selling, about insider trading, about corrupt copper, which we call it, which is actually called hot copper. It's just a very corrupt website which has stripped more money from mums and dads than any website anywhere else in the world. It's just a toxic website. And the responses I've got, and I also got a response from the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison. These responses seem like they're written by ASIC themselves for these ministers. That's for one. And secondly, it's just telling me I can be assured that there's nothing going on, nothing to see here. ASIC's taking care of it. They have sophisticated market surveillance technology. And if I'm still not concerned, I should report it to the Ombudsman, which I have done. I've done a very extensive complaint to the Ombudsman about all the white collar crime which is persisting on the ASX. Now, I'll tell you what I've done. Now, I've used Quintus. I had a shareholder from Quintus sign a statement saying exactly what happened with the manipulation of the share price, with the short selling, with the directors that took over and tried to mislead the market. Not the founder and chairman, Frank Wilson, who I believe was acting in the interests of shareholders. I got him to sign a statement, this shareholder, to say that he's not satisfied with ASIC's response to our complaints about what happened and how BlackRock took control of the company and how Quintus was put into voluntary administration by the banks. And then that was the first one. The second one, I got a Arium shareholder to do something very similar. He wrote a very lengthy statement about what happened with REM, how short sellers sabotaged the capital raising, drove it into voluntary administration. Mentha took over. They sold the assets to their mates in a cheap fire sale price, and they now want to relist it on the ASX at inflated value. It's just, in my opinion, a straight theft from shareholders. The third one was I had someone who has reported hot copper. He became aware that an insider was pumping and dumping on hot copper. Now, this insider was a broker who had been raising capital for a pump and dump company. The company was a rubbish company, and he was just raising money at discounted prices. And he wanted to sell his shares to unsuspecting victims who thought the company was a good company. So he was going onto hot copper using an alias, and he would say all these things about how great the company is, but he was just a fraud because he was just trying to sell those shares at the same time. Now, this happens hundreds, thousands of times a day on hot copper. It's just basically owned by brokers and sophisticated investors who want to pump and dump their stocks on you and give you their garbage shares, which are just worth rubbish. So he had all the evidence. He found out who this broker was. He found out which other stocks he was pumping and dumping on, and he wrote that in a statement for me, signed it, and he's put complaints into ASIC about this. ASIC have done nothing. So again, I've got his statement saying that he is dissatisfied with ASIC's handling of his complaint. Another one was Flinders Mines. Flinders Mines shareholders were dudded when the directors said that the company was worth a pittance. Actually, the company had really good iron ore reserves, and the majority shareholders wanted all that reserves for themselves. They thought, how can we get rid of the shareholders? Let's for years just say that the drilling results are all terrible and the company is worth nothing. People will start selling, and when it gets to a low enough level, let's delist the company, privatize it, and get the shares off everyone for a fraction of what they're worth. So many Flinders Mines shareholders complained about all this to ASIC that ASIC had to start their own phone line to handle all the complaints. It was that serious, and still ASIC have not investigated what happened there, which was just a brazen theft, in my opinion, of the shareholders. So I got a shareholder there, and I also got two other companies, shareholders, to write reports. So I got 6 people to write very lengthy reports about the fraud which occurred and their complaints to ASIC and their response from ASIC, and they all said they basically got no response from ASIC. Now, the response I got when I sent all these statements in to the Ombudsman, the first response I got was, oh, we're going to not look into this because you haven't complained to ASIC yet. And this was just absolutely laughable, because all the statements I had sent them mentioned that complaints had been lodged with ASIC and there haven't been complaints. So I complained about the Ombudsman's response, and it went up a level to the next person. And I was not satisfied with their answer because they tried to close it down as well. So I went to the highest level you can get, which is a person called Jeff Bridgeland from the Ombudsman. He sent me a lengthy email which does not address anything at all about which I complained about, and instead he went off on a tangent about some complaint my mother made. Now, I can send anyone that email. It just shows you all these government departments like ASIC and the Ombudsman and these top-level politicians are covering up the biggest crimes that have been committed against Australians, which is the theft of their life savings on the Australian stock market. And complaining to ASIC and the Ombudsman and these politicians gets people nowhere. It's a merry-go-round. It's just a frustration. And That's that, period. Now, the second aspect of this is complaining to journalists. Now, we have sent incredible amounts of information about price manipulation, price rigging, and insider trading, you name it, we have sent to journalists. Now, the only one who is reporting anything is Michael West. And we've written to the Financial Review, we've written to the Guardian, we've written to the Age, we've written to the Sydney Morning Herald. I think I've written to 1,000 journalists. The best response I've got back is, can you show me more evidence? And then I show them more evidence and it gets ignored. Now, I've heard it that these journalists are not permitted to report that share prices are being manipulated due to their editorial constraints. It's too upsetting to those that are doing this. But to give an example, I want to use the example of Galaxy Resources, which is an Australian lithium miner, which is a very good company, very successful, reserves of lithium, which China has a lot of demand for. Now that share price has been manipulated down from $4 down to $1 in the last year or two. It's just straight manipulation. And we know who's doing it. We've sent in information about it. And who's doing a thing about it? We've sent to Jackie Lambie, we've sent to Andrew Wilkie, we've sent to the Greens, we've sent to several Liberal politicians, Labor politicians, we've attempted with One Nation, some of the minor parties. No interest to deal with this problem, which is, I believe, the reason that the government is not able to collect enough tax revenue to pay for essential services, and this is why they are privatizing everything, and this is why our electricity prices are going up, our parking prices are going up, and it's all to do with the stock market and how algorithms are able to control prices. So thank you for listening to the introduction, and hopefully I'll be able to post some more videos up with some more evidence.